Hi, and welcome to Healthcare IT Today. I'm Colin Hung, and today I am joined by Dr. Andres Jimenez, Chief Medical Information Officer for CorroHealth. And today we're going to be talking about behavior change and AI, as well as getting a little bit of background, which is very interesting, about the good doctor. Thank you for joining me on the program today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Colin. Happy to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about behavior change now. You mentioned that that was an area of study for you. It's certainly a hot topic of discussion in healthcare. It's changing people's behaviors, both patient behaviors, but also physician, clinician, frankly, anybody in healthcare. We're looking to change behaviors, to do things differently, to do things better. Why is it so hard for us to change behavior?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. So it has indeed been my primary focus for over a decade now. And some of my early research as well led to me starting Implement HIT, which is the company I started before working with Corro. And it is a challenge for sure, particularly because there are a lot of obstacles to behavior change. And I think we had one model that worked worked somewhat, right? Which is more of an apprentice model to change behavior in medicine, see one, do one, teach one. And along this same timeline, over the last 15 years, we've had this additional technological revolution, right? Where not only can we deliver, we went from, I think my first online training module for the Department of Anatomy at Dartmouth Medical School, where we developed an interface for x-rays and we put it on a CD-ROM. And that was pretty innovative at the time, to not only being able to further develop the interactions of those modules, but now the delivery, right? We can just stream it anywhere. It doesn't even matter the size practically anymore, the file size. So at the same time, we've had now new opportunities to try to influence behavior, right? Particularly online. And I think one of the challenges is whenever you have any new technology is that it's very difficult for people to step out of the paradigm. So it's kind of like when they first invented the car. The first kind of models, before we got to the dominant design of vehicles today, the first couple of models were like a horse and carriage, a mechanical horse tied to a carriage, and they still were steering it with like these stirrups, right? And so because it wasn't, people try to apply in the same way. In education, what I've noticed, and it's still happening today, it's still probably the predominant form, is that they went from an instructor-led person at the front of the classroom teaching to a recording talking head, right? They've taken the old paradigm and they just digitized it. And then now it's online education. But you really have to, I think in any type of new technology, new innovation, you really have to try to step away from the old paradigm and say, okay, now I have this new technology. The goal is the same, right? We've always had physicians. There's always advancements in medicine. So there's always things to learn, and not just to learn, but be able to apply effectively within your practice. But now we have this new media type. And instead of just using the same paradigm and recording a lecture and a talking head, how do we just wipe the slate clean and develop something that's ideal at changing behavior? I think that's been the root of issues, because lots of times the knee-jerk reflex in healthcare behavior change is like, we need to just give training. We need to train, and if there's more to train, let's give them more training and measured in units of time. Not necessarily, and at best is measured in units of, did everyone pass, or what's the average score on the test, or what is the average satisfaction score of the deliverer, the instructor that delivered that course. Whereas we really need to go beyond that and say, well, did behavior change? And even if behavior changes, that still doesn't mean you get the desired performance, right? Because there are other obstacles around that that could impede the ability for that behavior to manifest into the desired performance change. So I think those are, just to kind of summarize, I think that we've had, the technological kind of revolution infiltrate every aspect of medicine, including training. And I think for the first 10 years, at least, most people have been stuck in the old paradigm of just, taking what they did in the human form, in-person form, and they've just digitized that. And I think only now you're starting to see more and more people really thinking about it from a different paradigm and focusing on behavior change.
So in your opinion, is is the difficulty of behavior change, is it because we're just so comfortable in doing what we're doing in healthcare? Is it more that that's just the way healthcare has been, I'll call it trained or brought up, that we always just kind of default back to, hey, this is the way it's always done? Or is it something else? Is it another underlying problem that we have yet to address in terms of changing people's behaviors in healthcare? Because let's be honest, like a lot of the workflows we have now are still the same workflows from the 1970s and 80s in a
Yeah.
lot of different departments. As you've just said, we've just applied some new technologies to make it a little bit better. So to me, is there something more fundamental here where, hey, like, you know what, we just latch on and we just stay latched to this, and that's why behavior change is so hard.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and with that, there's also an opportunity. So I think part of the reason why there really hasn't been as much movement as there could be is that the fact is that healthcare is already super expensive, and every dollar has to be accounted for, right? Healthcare in the U.S. And so the challenge with training up until recently is that it was very difficult to directly connect an ROI on your investment into training. I mean, you have like big studies from like, some of the early education when I was doing my master's in education, right? We did a lot of work looking at Motorola, who did a lot of pioneering work in human capital development. And we're able to show that, in the long term, we were able to, have more productivity and more outcomes and so forth, right? So applying that to healthcare without a specialized approach for physicians, I don't know if you necessarily saw those same results, but people didn't even have the ability to wait, right? They're like, all right, do we pay for an ICU and, a new medication or new intervention that's directly related to, our fee for service model and can support that and bring dollars in immediately, which is understandable because it's also tied to saving lives and so forth. Or we can invest into more training or more advanced training, which we don't really know whether or not it's changing behavior. And even if it does change behavior, we don't really know whether or not it's changing our desired performance. And it's probably maybe not doing that within a year, right? And so, and quite frankly, a lot of the training, I've seen a lot of training, and we've come across, we've consulted, we've developed our own, and a lot of the training is not effective, especially when you look at one size approach for every member of the healthcare organization versus, developing something unique for physicians, right? Because they're a very unique group within healthcare that require a different approach. So with that, I think that was part of the problem, is that there wasn't a direct connection to ROI to justify additional investments, and particularly to experiment with new ways. We've been pretty bold, and because we've been working on it for such a long time and very specialized. We primarily specialize on physician training. And so with that, it allowed us to understand it better and take bigger steps, right? And what I found is that now there's more opportunity, because one of the things that's changed over the last particularly 5 years is that we have, because of all the initiatives around quality and value-based care, there's now an infrastructure to track quality measures. There's kind of, which, there's a way to track performance. We didn't have to develop that in the training part within our training function. All of that's already it's pretty robust. It's used to, impacts billions of dollars. And so now there's data. And that data we can use to not only identify where one individual might have an issue versus another individual versus another, and we can then tailor and deliver something personalized to each individual at scale. But we can also measure, because, it's collecting data, right? Like your population health platform, if you're monitoring your ambulatory measures for quality around colorectal screening and mammography and so forth, right? That's collecting data. That infrastructure is set up so we can use that data to, number one, figure out what do we deliver to each individual physician, but then we can look at it a month later. And as long as we have the systems in place to track and measure engagement, we can calculate an impact. So in one regard, I think that the part of the problem was that there wasn't that direct line of sight to ROI. I think today, I know we've been doing a lot of work on this in the last 5 years of really having that data, that performance-based data, to use to not only target to figure out what do we deliver to physicians, so we know they do not have time, and then we measure that afterwards to see, well, what can you do? Did something change? Because quite frankly, you need to measure and assess across multiple levels the output of your training to know whether or not it had an impact. And collecting the data is the first step on that.
So you're talking, I love that. You're talking about using data. You're talking about collecting this information. Obviously that requires some technology. So what role does technology play in behavior change, in changing specifically physician and clinician behavior?
Yeah. So I think, and if you think about, if we look at this from a training perspective, and let's even take a step back and say, well, how do we even measure whether or not training was successful? There's behavior change is one part of that, right? Most people have been stuck with some of the basic pieces of that, which are, number one, were they just satisfied? They go through the training experience and everyone said, yeah, 95% liked the instructor. And then the second level might be, well, and then knowledge, right? So everyone went through this course. At the end of it, they trained on Epic for 8 hours. And at the end, they were able to do 2 notes and put in their orders with 80% accuracy. They got 80% on the test. But there's higher levels of understanding whether or not something was impactful. One being behavior change is I think the third level. There's this Kirkpatrick model that's used for evaluation in human capital development. It was pioneered outside of healthcare, but we've adapted it for healthcare, and it's been incredibly helpful in trying to understand kind of, what moves the needle, how does technology influence? Because if you're not assessing it appropriately, then you're operating in the dark, right? The final layer is performance change, because there are times where I might train a physician on, let's say, using the EHR as an example, how to perform the ideal workflow in Epic, and or in an EHR. Maybe we shouldn't use a specific name, but in any EHR. But the rest of their organization is set up where they have like 60 patients. There's no time for them to be able to apply it. They're distracted. So while their behavior may have changed temporarily, they're in an environment where the performance is still not able to come out. So the first step, I think, in technology being able to influence behavior changes is knowing how to assess whether or not the desired output, because based on what's happening, you can kind of figure out where do you need to make a change. The second piece that we've found to be incredibly important when it comes to training physicians is the relevance and personalization, because physicians are a very unique group of learners in that they have a lot of things competing for their time, a lot of important things too, right? It's kind of like, do I see this patient, or do I complete my 2-hour sexual harassment training where I have to click through everything and watch it, right? Or do I go home and spend time with my kids for dinner, right? These are all very important things that are competing for their time. And what we found that the role of technology has been really instrumental is that we can take this data about the physicians, we can parse it, create some rules to parse it at scale, and then we deliver just what everyone needs to kind of engage with. So instead of everyone getting 2 hours of training, technology will allow us to understand data about that individual, that physician, their practice patterns, how they're doing everything, their patient populations, their coding, their everything. There's data for that. And then we can use that to then at scale, deliver personalizations for that physician. And if I don't have time, instead of giving me everything that my department needs to know, why don't you give me the 1 or 2 things that I need to know? And that is how technology has, I think, had a huge impact, because it turns out that you can still train more by giving less time if the information is more relevant, because they retain more information at the end of that.
So how do you achieve? I mean, that sounds like you're applying some very sophisticated algorithms to really understand my behavior as a physician, to know that, hey, like based on your pattern, you're not going to sit through a 2-hour, or you don't need to sit through a 2-hour training session, because all you need to know is these 3 things, right? Like, so, it's like, is this AI that's getting involved here in this, or or am I missing it?
Yeah, so in the beginning, it was, man, that's the part of the reason why, in addition to becoming a doctor, I got those 3 additional masters and focused my research on just that area, because we did have the benefit of just focusing on one learner type. And then, although the data that gives you a view into what their practice looks like was often siloed. We were able to manually create rules because it was the same similar scenarios for us. But now we have more tools, right? We have access to AI that can help us go a step further. The way we're using AI, we're using it to support decision making, right? We're using it to help make better decisions faster. We still haven't tried to entirely replace some initial process where we're defining some rules and then we're going off of that. But it has provided us a ton of insight. So for instance, we did some work with the second largest health system in the country, and we had maybe 15,000 physicians in our system, and prior to joining CorroHealth, and we were able to use the historical data to predict by specialty what future implementations might show in terms of engagement and training. And the reason why that's important is that if you're planning out, rolling out hospital to hospital to hospital, then, and you know what percentage of your physicians will likely to engage, not just by saying 30%, but really accounting for the types of specialties, the practice patterns, and what the data you have using AI, then you can resource allocate more appropriately, right? And you can deal with a certain group of physicians one way, and then you're ready to deal with the individuals that need more one-on-one, right? So that was incredibly helpful. Some of the work that we're doing now is that we're able to kind of predict where we think some of the challenges are for certain particular, and the work we're doing with CorroHealth is being able to predict where there might be errors, coding errors, query opportunities, and using that to be able to then deliver interventions on education. Instead of allowing it to repeat over and over again without doing something, it's kind of like, in lots of scenarios, it's like mopping around an overflowing sink, right? The sink keeps on overflowing with coding errors and query opportunities, and people are just mopping around it. But the goal would be to also say, hey, can we turn down the faucet a little bit, right? While we're simultaneously doing this work. So yeah, technology, and then now the progression into AI, we're able to do today with our small and nimble team what maybe 3 or 4 years ago would have taken a whole Stanford data science department to do, right? Because we have the opportunity to leverage things like AI services through Amazon, through Google, Microsoft, et cetera. We're able to do a lot more, and so technology and AI really is starting to help us, and it's been the components, right? We have access to data about performance now, right? Because we're tracking value-based care, we're tracking rev cycle type metrics around CDI, and then now we have technology allow us to kind of take that data and personalize it. And AI is helping us predict where those opportunities might be now, because we have access to all the data. And what's always been there from the beginning and still today, and the most very valuable component is measuring impact, right? You don't want to keep just shooting in the dark and not knowing, does this truly measure impact? Our customers want to know whether or not what we're doing, what they're paying us to do really truly moves the needle. And we can calculate that now at a not just as an association, but time dependent, dose dependent, based on engagement as the dose, and be able to demonstrate, yeah, this is an impact, but also have the opportunity to learn from that information and improve with every iteration of the cycle.
So Dr. Jimenez, you're talking about gathering this information, you're talking about integrating this data. That seems pretty hard, right, to manually do this. Have you experienced the same thing? And is there some solutions to maybe making that a little bit easier?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And this has really been the crux of our work, particularly our research over the last 5 years, where, upon gaining the ability to, have access to this data at a scalable way, I can receive a file that has all the performance metrics or quality performance metrics for 5,000 physicians, and then process it. We've piece by piece kind of peeled away, and with experimentations and pilots, to where we are today, which is this approach where we've fully integrated the process. We've gone from being able to now collect data from our own CorroHealth reviews of charts of hospitalizations, having physician level reviews where we can kind of track and measure that at kind of the gold standard of a review. But all of that data is captured now within this overall training platform. at a very detailed level. We were able to see whether or not only what was the starting codes, but we're able to see the final codes, but also the transitions from code to code, which is critically important. And then we've integrated that into the existing training program that allows us then to fully automate the downstream effects. So if we identify an individual that's an outlier, the system will automatically detect that as a statistical outlier in terms of a trend, send that physician a personalized email with that insight that says, hey, we've noticed that for this particular topic, you've had more queries than your peers, and then provide them with personalized examples, looking at, this is actually information from your queries, right? So whenever you tell a physician that there's something wrong with the performance, the first question they have, well, what patients are you talking about? So by having one fully integrated system, we're able to actually even pull in those examples in their learning. And then we're tracking whether or not they open that email or text message, whether or not they engage. And we have the continuous loop of reviews so that we can measure the impact of that afterwards. And then measure that in relation to how much engagement and when they specifically engage, right? That time-dependent and dose-dependent impact measurement is really, really key. And so we fully integrated that process. And, it's been an evolution in time. And I think we have, a very unique offering now where it's like in CDI, instead of just, always mopping around that overflowing sink, finding those coding errors, those query opportunities, using that information, knowing that, hey, we're always mopping in this area, to then it automatically say, well, let's adjust the faucet in that area, and not just find the mistakes, let's address the root cause of those mistakes, and try to fix it in one fully integrated bundle.
Let me see if I can paraphrase this back and make sure I got it right. So right now, today, you may get a lot of CDI issues, you may get a lot of rejections, you may get a lot of issues when it comes to that process. But instead of just cleaning it up all the time, what you're saying is that this tool will look at the source of the issues, which in this case is maybe some of the way the documentation is entered into the system and recorded in the system. And based on information drawn from the application itself, it will know, oh, like this person has these kinds of potential issues with using the system, and therefore it'll propose a very customized education program just for them to address that problem.
So that overall process is not necessarily new but it was mostly manual, right?
Okay.
That entire process before, where you have people manually reviewing, then there's a report at the end of the quarter or after they hit a threshold, and then there's this large report that's delivered. All of that was manual. And what I'm referring to is at the moment they find a statistically significant variation in terms of error, which may vary depending on the group that they're around, the number of charts reviewed, the percentage of errors that person is making. Right. Within 20 minutes, being able to then send that individual physician a personalized message and start the clock on tracking whether or not performance changes. So it's really the scalability of the technology, but also the reduction of cycle time from identifying a problem to actually doing an intervention has been reduced significantly. And being able to do that for a certain percentage of your physicians in a repeatable fashion can be extremely valuable in terms of addressing many different types of issues that as physicians, I mean, as a physician, there's lots of things I'm trying to do every day. I feel like I'm trying to take care of my patients the best possible way every day. And I'm trying to also satisfy what the organization wants in terms of quality and regulation and compliance. And at the same time, also trying to satisfy, my family by making it home in time for dinner at the end of my workday, right? And so by using this approach where we can be very personalized, I think it also, in addition to having that complete loop, is respectful of the physician's time, recognizing that they don't have much of it. And so let me just give you the top, your 1 and 2, Colin, and my 1 and 2 issues, and the next doctor's 1 and 2 issues, with some way to kind of make some change right away.
Amazing. Amazing. Dr. Jimenez, you've shared some awesome information with us today. Let me ask you this final question. Where can people find more information about this product?
Yeah, so, CorroHealth, you can find information about the physician led reviews that we're doing, and the new Clarity app that Corro has put out, and it's in use with clients, and and we're very excited about it. The response has been really incredible. I think in most meetings, folks they haven't really seen that approach with the education, the personalized tied into the existing process. So we're excited, clients are excited, and certainly you can find more at CorroHealth.
Perfect. And that's CorroHealth, CORRO health.com.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Jimenez, for your time. Really appreciate you being on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This has been Colin Hung with Healthcare IT Today. Thanks for listening.